Thank you for joining us on At Issue, and welcome to either the end of the year or the start of a new year, depending on when you're viewing this program. We welcome you to 2016. With the end of the year, it's time to look back and update some of the topics that we discussed this past year. Later in the program, we're going to be looking at economic development with the CEOs of the Economic Development Councils in Bloomington Normal and in Peoria. We'll visit with the Imam of the Peoria Islamic Foundation. And first, we're going to be talking about the impact the state has had on the provision of human services. And to have that discussion, I have welcomed to the program once again Mike Kennedy. Mike is the president and CEO of the Human Service Center. Mike, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And also joining us is Jim Runyon. Jim is the Executive Vice President of Easter Seals Central Illinois. Thank you for being with us, Jim.
Absolutely.
And I mentioned the state, so let's have that conversation. Where are we? We're 6 months into the new fiscal year for the state. What's the impact budgetarily for the Human Service Center? And I don't necessarily mean numbers, I mean the impact on services.
The primary impact is there were a couple services that the state contracted to pay us to provide prior to July 1st that had to do with linking people from criminal justice system to mental health treatment. And the other is supportive employment. Those services have been discontinued at this point in time. The staff of those have been absorbed into the staffing pattern through vacant positions. The other services, though we are not receiving a commitment from the state to provide, the board of directors has chosen to continue them. Those are primarily the psychiatric services and services to individuals who would not have private or third-party pay to contribute towards the cost of services. The organization is taking a risk that those services will eventually be paid for.
You're working on faith.
That's probably the best way of putting it. It's a risk.
Likewise at Easter Seals?
Our situation is a little bit different. It depends on the program that we have. For any of our programming that has Medicaid as a payer, we've seen a 17% cut. So we're living within that. For early intervention, which was at great risk in July and was at great risk up through the middle of September, we're now being paid under a court order. That's great news. And not only we at Easter Seals as the holder of the early intervention coordination activities, but also any provider of those services is getting paid right now and pretty timely. The biggest impact on us is going to be any of our autism programming that was funded by the state. And that's a completely different story.
Well, let's talk about that story. Is there an autism program?
There isn't since July 1. We crafted over the many years a really excellent service network across the state for children with autism, and it was completely state funded. They were not offered a contract for this current fiscal year. And so for those of us, about 18 entities that were a part of that service network, some of us have completely closed doors. Others have restricted their services. Easter Seals would be unique in that we've continued to provide all the services that we were, even though we lost $175,000 from the state to do that. We've continued on, and we will do that as long as we possibly can. We remain hopeful that the legislature and the governor will not allow the state of Illinois to be spending no money for children with autism, and that at some point, after the budget is finally solved, there will be some return in some form for the autism program.
But right now, essentially, it's shut down.
It's essentially shut down.
What does that mean to a family that has a child in need of those services? What are they doing?
It depends on what part of the state you live in. So if you live in the far southern part of the state where those providers have shut down as a part of the network, it means that you're either traveling very long distances, in some cases outside the state, but that's only going to be if you have some financial resource yourself in private insurance. If you're a family served through Medicaid, you're probably going without. The same thing is going to be true in the Rockford area. Those providers have ceased services. Here locally in Peoria and the greater central Illinois area, we've continued to provide those services. But where the growing pressure point is now is between those served through private insurance and those served through Medicaid. And so we've always treated those children and those families the same. What you're going to start to see is that's no longer possible because services are going to be so restricted in their availability and are so ill paid that you may have to see if you've got private insurance, you move ahead on the line. If you're served through Medicaid, you may end up at the end of the line.
So Central Illinois does have some
Autism services, absolutely. Easter Seals continues to provide those services.
pulling money from.
Well, we're one of those unique organizations that said, we were never going to be dependent on the state for our primary funding. So we've diversified our funding years ago. And we do a lot of fundraising in order to accomplish that. So what we are presently doing is pulling that from fundraising contributions in order to maintain that. But that's not sustainable. We hope that the state will once again become a financial partner in autism services.
Let's turn to Human Service Center and specifically psychiatric services, because as I understand it, that's where the big hit is.
Correct.
What kind of services, in broad terms, what kind of services did you provide, and are you still providing those services with the budget impasse in Springfield?
The primary service would be psychiatric evaluations, medication evaluations, and it's one of the primary services for the population that we serve. We have not changed any of that to this point in time. My concern would be that if there's not some means to make up for the amount of funds that we received prior to June 1st that they have not committed after that point in time, will we need to reduce resources? Obviously, if you reduce resources, one of a couple things are going to happen. People are either not going to get the treatment they need, they're not going to be able to get in the door. And again, the end result for most of those is people end up in a different system, whether they end up in the criminal justice system in jails, whether they end up in emergency departments, whether law enforcement has to do more responses, whether ambulances need to have more contact with people. You're going to pay for it one place or another.
And if you wait, it's going to be more expensive, would be my guess.
For folks, it's like any illness. If you go to your primary health care physician and you have a wound, if you don't get that wound treated, there's sometimes that it heals on its own, but more likely than not, it's going to get worse and it's going to be more expensive, and it causes more dysfunction to people.
In the psychiatric, and just so people understand, psychiatrists prescribe meds for these patients, which allows them to function within the normal range of what we would expect for work or play.
It's doing the same kinds of things you and I do every day. People sometimes believe it's going to cure people, and it doesn't. A medication helps with the symptoms so people can do what they need to do, learn the skills they need to do everything that you and I do.
And neither of you with autism nor with the psychiatric services know if money will be there, or if there is some money, how much.
Correct.
Yeah, that's correct.
Which makes the budgeting process.
It makes it very difficult. You can't project into the future, and we're not talking long-term future, just short-term future. I think the biggest struggle that I have as someone trying to manage this situation is not knowing what's going to happen after the first of the year when there finally is a budget solution of some kind. Even though I'm getting paid under a court order, I think it's very likely that we're going to see anywhere from a 10 to 20% cut annualized whenever there is a budget deal. And so for those of us who are getting paid, it's figuring out how do you preserve enough funds so that should you be handed a cut 3/4 of the way through the year, that you're going to be able to live with that cut and not immediately have to suspend services and start laying off staff.
And Jim is talking about future income from the state. You have receivables from the state.
Correct.
And what does that amount to?
It's about $1.5 million over the course of the first 4 months, 4 to 5 months of this year.
You've been providing services that the state has been reimbursing you for in the past, but it currently has not been paying.
That's the total receivables. It would be $1.5 million. If I look at the two primary areas I talked about, the psychiatric services and for the individuals who don't have first or third party payer, it's probably, about $800,000. So it's, I think we talk about it that we are businesses as human service providers. And that's both a blessing and a curse. The blessing is we figure out ways to generate enough resources to provide people the service they need. The curse of it is we're in the business because of people. And when you don't have the resources to do it, you're forced to make very difficult decisions about you can either cut a service out or you dilute it to the point that it's really not effective. And then why do it? And I think that's the difficult decisions that organizations struggle with every day. And probably as difficult as it is right now, the hard decisions are going to be when that budget's made and you know what you have and you don't have. I think all of us are going to have to make some prioritization and make some changes.
And we've been talking about people receiving services, but what about employees? Then it might be difficult.
It's very difficult for folks. That instability of, will I have a job now? How much longer will I have my job? Am I facing a layoff after the first of the year? Creates a real morale problem and there's no good way to reassure them at this point. Anybody who pays any attention to the newspaper or to TV and pays attention to the budget woes of the state, it's not a pretty picture, and they don't see a lot of future there.
You're active in the Illinois Partners for Human Service. For the benefit of the audience, please describe that in brief, and then tell me what impact that organization has had on legislators, if any.
Good question. Illinois Partners is a statewide coalition of human service providers, over 850 human service providers from across the state. We band together to advocate on behalf of those things that we all have in common, which is our relationship with the state. So I serve as chair of the board and honored and privileged to do that. What we've been attempting to do since even before, last February, we were really focused on how do we get a budget and how do we make sure that those we serve continue to be well served. So as this has continued beyond July 1 and into the fall and now clearly into the new year, Illinois Partners statewide has been engaged in a number of activities with individual legislators, with groups of legislators. We've been approached by key numbers of legislators to come meet with them as they craft potential solutions. The unfortunate thing is that none of those solutions have moved forward, and that the stalemate between the governor and the speaker remains. And that will be the case until one or both of them reach a point where a solution makes sense for them. And that's unfortunate.
Have you had any success talking to Central Illinois legislators?
We talk, Mike knows this well. We talk to the legislators individually. We bring them together here locally under the banner of Illinois Partners to talk. They've talked, and we've talked at them. They feel impotent in this situation as well. They know, they empathize, they feel, they know our story and continue to carry that to Springfield when they go there. But it is a situation where they really are impotent in changing and bringing solution at this point.
We've talked about some cuts in services and the uncertainty for the future. Is What's the situation with demand? I know it varies by program, but you're in an arena where funds are shrinking. What's demand doing for some of those services?
I'll say demand stays high. And part of that, it's something that those of us in the field hope someday would happen, and now that's happening, its timing's just not very good. They call that destigmatization, that it's okay that people experience a mental health or a substance abuse problem. And as people are going, okay, now I want to do something about it, there's a question whether or not there's going to be resources there for people. So it's great that society is getting to that point to look at it. It's unfortunate that Illinois in particular is in a situation of they aren't sure how they're going to be able to respond to it.
It's a funny business, human services. Unlike other businesses, when your demand is high, you should have great access, great service, expanding services. The unfortunate thing, though, is as the demand for our services continues to grow, we're funded in large part by the state of Illinois, and everybody knows the financial state of the state of Illinois. So at the same time our demand goes up, the service access and services continue to be limited. And so that creates a situation where people leave the state of Illinois. The governor has talked about he's got to bring about his changes in order to keep people from fleeing Illinois. Well, we run into people all the time who are fleeing the state, and not the kinds of folks that you want to be leaving the state. It's going to be people with good, solid jobs, but who happen to have a child with autism, or an adult child with a mental health issue. And what they need is support from those services, and if they can't get it here, they're leaving the state to find it.
Are you operating on reserves, or are you additional fundraising or line of credit?
Currently it's operating on reserves. We right now do not do any fundraising. Though we have a line of credit, we have not had to access it.
And same question to you.
No, at this point, we have lines of credit. We've utilized some of our lines of credit, but not to an extreme extent. Because we work for the state, we're always paid in arrears. So you always have to have a line of credit in order to pay your current bills. We've obtained additional lines of credit so that should, after the first of the year, we need to use that, we can. But at this point, we're very diversified in our funding streams.
Lines of credit, that just scares me that a human service provider has to turn to a bank, and that's if you can find the bank. So it's not a good situation. So when we talked in July, it wasn't good. It's worse now?
I'm not sure. I don't think it's worse now. We're almost adjusting to it. And until that budget's done, we understand, as Jim said, we have to find the means to pay our bills, to pay our employees. And so I hate to say get accustomed to it, but it feels like that sometimes.
It's a new world.
Yes.
And with
Very
that,
different world.
let me say thank you to Mike Kennedy, who is with the Human Service Center, and to Jim Runyon, who is with Easter Seals Central Illinois. Thank you for the update.
Sure.
We'll be back in just a moment with a visit with the Imam of the Peoria Islamic Foundation. We're back, and there has been a lot that has happened since last February when I had at this table Imam Kamil Mufti. He is with the Islamic Foundation of Peoria, and let's talk a little bit about that, the most recent event, which was in San Bernardino. Saeed Farouk and Tashfeen Malik, actually, she went on Facebook to announce that they were going to do this in the name of ISIS, or ISIL if you prefer. And I know you have a third name that you would prefer using.
The Daesh.
The Daesh. And once again, we have people who profess to be following the Islamic faith committing heinous crimes. This has to be difficult for you.
Absolutely. It's an act which is committed in the name of Muslims, And it has somehow becomes associated and attached with Islam and Muslims. And then we have to do the job of simply explaining that these are criminals, these are barbaric people who are committing acts in their own name for themselves. They have nothing to do with our faith community, absolutely. I mean, it breaks our heart. I mean, because what happens as a result of these activities is the Muslim community gets targeted even more. There is greater mistrust, there is greater suspicion. It fuels Islamophobia, it fuels attacks on mosques, and Muslims overall are looked at with suspicion, mistrust, and fear. I mean, it's horrendous.
And in fact, there were attacks following San Bernardino in Hawthorne, California, where 2 mosques were defaced with terms involving Jesus, etc.
Yes. And there have also been arson attacks in some mosques as well. So there have been individuals as well. You know, there was Hamza, a Somali American, who was thrown off of 6th floor recently. So there have been a spate of attacks following this.
And then you couple that with the call by presidential candidate Donald Trump to bar all Muslims from entering the United States. So you couple all these together, and I'm starting to hear that all terrorists are Muslims. And that certainly is not a good position for any country to be in, where we're starting to point directly at the Muslim faith.
I think this has to, we really have to challenge that notion that all Muslims are not terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims. The first question to be asked is, how do you define a terrorist? Would anyone making that statement even entertain the fact that somebody who's like them, Christian, white, or Jewish, or like them in any way, who looks like them, resembles them, or comes from their faith community, can they even entertain this fact, commit an act that could be called terrorist? That would be the first question. And actually, we can have a discussion after that. How about acts which were committed to bring political change, motivated by religion, done by people belonging to other faith communities, and I'm not in any way insinuating that they represent those faith communities. I even would apologize if anyone even feels offended for me to bring this up. But the only reason I bring this up is to clarify this false statement, this false association, that all terrorists are Muslims, which is simply incorrect. Because of the association and the wordplay which is being used. Whenever a Muslim commits a crime, it says Islamic terrorism, Muslim terrorist, but we never ever hear the word. Even when it has been committed by people who have the Confederate flag on their number plates, who attended, for example, either the Lutheran church, like this young fellow who killed 9 African Americans in a church in South Carolina, or the other person whose wife in 1993 court papers, divorce papers, said that he is an evangelical Christian.
Well, and you can look at Timothy McVeigh at Oklahoma City.
Who was raised as a Catholic and identified and influenced with the Christian identity movement. The examples are plenty. Would we even entertain the fact? Now, if you're even close to that possibility, I think we have a problem right there.
So, and fear is driving this to
Absolutely.
a great degree. So do you have some thoughts or some recommendations to those in positions that can affect change on how we might go about changing the image? Because we, as you've mentioned in the past, we don't necessarily say a Christian terrorist, but we do say a Muslim terrorist. So how do we go about changing this feel?
I mean, I obviously will not support calling anybody who is of Christian faith committing a violent act a Christian terrorist or a Jewish terrorist. I would not support that. All I will ask is fairness. That's what I would ask for. Fairness to be applied across the board when it comes to Muslims in any matter. So Muslims should be treated as Americans, and they should be treated with fairness in the same way like any other minority group would be, or majority group for that matter. I think there should be greater dialogue. And I think dialogue is taking place at certain levels, but perhaps it is not taking place with the right people. So within every religion, there are those people who have shut themselves down. I'll name all 3 of them. Between Muslims, Jews, as well as Christians, there are groups within all these 3 religions that are opposed to dialogue. As a matter of fact, you will find pastors, you will find rabbis, and you will find imams who have never sat down on a table with somebody with different beliefs. Just dialogue. I'm not talking about praying together. I'm not talking about any simple dialogue. Sit down as human beings, because we are all in the end Americans, and have a conversation and ask questions, hear the other side out.
And you've done this?
I have done this, and I have been doing this actively with our local rabbi, with several pastors, including some conservative pastors as well as liberal Christian pastors. And they are the ones who really, over time, have become some of the closest and best friends to myself. They visit the Islamic Center, they come over there to attend sermons. Pastors from the Presbyterian Church, from the Evangelical Church, the Evangelical movement, born again. So across them, I have tried to reach out. And then there have been those who have refused to talk. There are those as well who simply refuse to talk. And I think that in order to address this fear and hatred, the least we can do is sit down with the other, whoever that other might be, without even agreeing with them. Just the ability to sit down and have a conversation over food.
Over food, of course. Do you think that part of the reason for the hesitance to sit down with you might have something to do with they don't understand Islam?
But my contention would be, how could you possibly understand if you're not even willing to sit down? How could you possibly try to even understand? For example, a lot of people, they are not trained in religious studies. They are trained within their own tradition. As a matter of fact, within their own tradition being the ultimate truth. And some of the struggles, for example, which we see with the abortion clinics and, some segments, and I try to be very careful in my choice of words without, using one brush to paint a whole faith community or even one segment of a whole faith community. Within the Christian community, there are those who have not accepted as yet Roe versus Wade. And they are opposed to abortion. My question to them would be very simple. I understand your fear of Sharia being imposed in America and our freedoms being under the threat. What about the Christian Sharia, for the lack of a better word? Sharia over here, I would use it as being the Christian values or the Christian beliefs of certain groups. How about them being imposed in a secular America on everybody else? I mean, how would they respond to that? One Christian leader, Reverend Franklin Graham, was recently asked on MSNBC if he believes Islam is compatible with the US Constitution. The question I'd never hear being asked, actually I heard it once, it was asked from Ben Carson. And the answer was very interesting. Do you believe the Bible is compatible, or your understanding of the Bible, or your church's understanding of the Bible is compatible with the US Constitution? That's the question I would like to be asked from many folks.
My understanding in my limited research of the various religions, I was raised a Christian, that really, if you go back to the origins, that there are a lot of commonalities with the Islamic faith, with the Jewish faith, and with the Christian faith. That we can look at Abraham, for instance.
Absolutely. There is, I believe, we have our differences. There's no question about that. And I think any honest discussion or dialogue should never neglect the differences among the three religions. At the same time, an honest dialogue should be built on our commonalities. And we do have Jews, Muslims, and Christians within their faith traditions have a lot of commonalities. It starts with Abraham. It starts with the reverence for Scripture in many cases. I wouldn't say this is true. Then you see again, it's a little bit dangerous because we are talking about three religions, and within those three religions, there are people who have very different beliefs. You have many denominations, many sects. So I would say within three religions, there are the extremists. I would count them there. There are those who are moderate, those who are more academic, those who are more intellectual, those who realize and see the times in which we live. And then there are those within three religions who are what I would call secular believers.
So as you look at opening up more dialogue between religions, and that could extend beyond the three we've been talking about,
sure,
to Hindu and any other religion.
Absolutely.
Let me look back at the most recent debate on CNN. Candidates Cruz, Santorum, Christie, Rubio, Trump, and Bush all used terms very similar to, they used terms like radical Islamist terrorism, radicalized Muslims, radical Sunni group, radical jihadist group. Now that may be the most acceptable of the group of them, but so our presidential candidates are using terms that are pejorative in nature?
I think the language which is being used is actually representative of a clash of civilizations. It is a language which wants to focus on division, on talking, on basically what are they really doing? They have basically picked up terms, which I hate to say most of them don't understand, and they are simply using it in order to promote fear. That's essentially what is being done. And instead of sitting down with Muslims and asking them, these words are not negative words. The word jihad, for example, means struggle. That's what it means. So when a Muslim is going through daily struggles, that's their daily jihad, so to say. The word actually comes from the word jahada, which means to struggle, to strive for something, to strive to be a better human being, to strive to make the society around us more peaceful, more moderate, and to inculcate those values. That's the jihad. So it's a jihad for different people. As a matter of fact, there is a book written some while ago called The American Jihad. And it talks about the struggles, and one of the people interviewed in there is Muhammad Ali, the boxer. And it talks about, quote, the jihad of the Muslims in the sense their struggles. So a very neutral word has been taken and given this spin and used in a way which simply is not acceptable, along with radicalization and other words. So a bunch of these terms have been used and slapped together, and then they're being used for political gain.
If our leaders are using those terms, it's no wonder in my mind that many people take that to heart. We're talking about the possible president of the United States.
Yes.
And we have distorted, well, we have to remember that, and this is not new information, but we were all immigrants.
True.
My family immigrated here many, many years ago, and the Muslims are maybe the latest group to come into America. Right now, I believe, and correct me if my numbers are wrong, but it's something like 3.5 million Muslims are in America, but it's projected to triple in the next 20 or 30 years. So
there is actually a difference of agreement among scholars as to the exact Muslim population. The minimum is 2 million that is projected, the highest is 11 million. And I'm not sure exactly what the most accurate number is, but it's somewhere in there. And I have read both these numbers.
So with those, and there's growth expected.
Absolutely.
So it is difficult for, at least for you, I would assume, to hear potential leaders of the country say that we need to bar Muslims from, as Donald Trump has said, bar Muslims from coming into the country, when of course there are already several million here. And
well, I mean, I want to mention two important points over here. The first is most of the Muslims in America are not immigrants. They're African Americans, some 23% of them. They came over here and they built this country, and they came over here as slaves. And we have good academic literature to back that up. That's the first observation that has to be corrected. So Muslims are not over, yes, there were waves of Muslims which came to America, but we still have an African American Islamic tradition in the country. So that's one thing which I want to at least bring to light. The second thing is that, actually I would change it from 2 to 3 points. I want to be very clear that security is a concern for Muslims as well. Muslims, as a matter of fact, are more scared than an average American, because they are being looked at with suspicion from one side, and they are, like any other group, targets of terrorism as well. For instance, these two individuals who went on a shooting crazy rampage in California, one of the people they shot, she didn't die, but she was injured, was a Muslim who worked in the county as well. And she was the wife of the director of the mosque where he used to pray, Sayyid Farooq. So the bullets and the bombs and the weapons of the terrorists do not make a distinction between a Muslim and a non-Muslim. As a matter of fact, most of the people who have suffered at the hand of global terrorism are not non-Muslims but Muslims. So, and the second point which is related to this is that Muslims, after these types of violent terrorist activities, they get targeted by Islamophobia. Their houses of worship are looked upon with suspicion. And anyone who looks Muslim, right? And we know that, I mean, there are people who are not Muslim, but they look like Muslims, like Sikhs and others. They are targets of these violent attacks from people who are scared and who go haywire as well.
And the Sikh temple up in outside of Milwaukee.
Wisconsin, yes. And the third point is, Muslims are not one group. They are all not from the Middle East. They all don't look the same. There are whites. There are people who speak perfect English without an accent who are Muslim. There are Chinese who are Muslims. How would you put a religious test? Would you put like a glass of wine at the gate of entry, at New York airport and say, here is wine, here's a ham sandwich. If you have it, you can come. If not, you can come. Okay, what if they do? Because they are coming over here potentially to harm us. What if they do? How are you going to vet them? So the idea sounds good, but practically, I have not heard anyone talk about what does it even mean.
To your point, in terms of they all look different, I think it's 56 countries have majority Muslim populations,
Yes.
something like that.
Yes, 56 countries.
So you'd have a lot of different ethnic appearances.
Absolutely.
So let me turn to a final point before we run out of time, and that is what we commonly refer to as ISIS. They are committing heinous crimes in the name of Islam. They're able to do so with American trucks, American weapons. Do you have a problem with, I understand that some of that came from, they were able to take it from the Iraqi army, et cetera. But what's your take on that?
Well, I want to mention two things about ISIS. One related to your question, and the other is an observation I would like to share.
And within 60 seconds, if you could.
Okay. The first is that every single Muslim scholar of any following, of any repute, any recognized Muslim voice in the world, and Muslim scholarly organizations, every single one of them, whether they are based in the West or whether they are based in the Muslim world, have condemned this group, these group of thugs and terrorists. That's one thing which should be very clear in everyone's mind. The second thing is they are selling oil. That's what's supporting them. And we are told that they sell oil worth $2 million every single day. Who are they selling it to? Why are those questions not being asked? How are they able to move that oil? What are the companies that are working with them? Which countries are receiving that oil? How come sanctions are not being put on those countries? How come those companies are not being shut down? How come those questions are not being asked? I think any peace-loving Muslim would love for this group to become inoperative or to disappear. But people actually have to do this and not use the fear of this group to target freedom and liberties.
And with that, I will say thank you so much to Imam Kamil Mufti for being here. We appreciate your insight, and we'll invite you back again in the future.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's my pleasure.
And we'll be back in just a moment with a look at economic development in both McLean and Peoria counties in view of the fact that the last time we visited with the economic development directors, we did not know that Caterpillar would have layoffs or that Mitsubishi would shut down their plant. That's next. And welcome back. I am pleased to be able to talk about economic development in McLean and in Peoria counties. The last time that we got together with the CEOs of the EDCs, it was prior to the announcement that Caterpillar would have a large number of layoffs and prior to the announcement that Mitsubishi would be closing its automobile plant over in Bloomington Normal. I am pleased to be able to welcome back to the table to talk about those issues and more again with Jennifer Daly. Jennifer is the CEO of the Peoria Economic Development Council. Thank you for joining us again this year.
Thanks for having me.
And Kyle Ham is the counterpart, CEO at the Bloomington Normal Economic Development Council. Thank you as well.
Thank you.
And let's start with, Kyle, the announcement that Mitsubishi is closing its plant. That's not new news, but what is the status of that plant right now?
The current status is we've developed a local task force with our local community leaders, mayors and county board and some business leaders to look at two things. One is how do we work with Mitsubishi to find a new user, a new buyer for that facility, preferably in the automotive industry. That'll be a priority for us in the short run, but eventually it may change to what other type of manufacturing might fit the needs of that property. The second piece is making sure that we're caring for the workforce that had been let go through other workforce initiatives. We're doing career fairs. We have a center set up through CareerLink that will allow workers to come in for the next year from 8 to 5, 5 days a week to learn about resources that they might need in their career search and upskilling if needed for other job opportunities.
There were about 1,200 employees at the time of the announcement. Have you seen a large demand for help after the layoffs?
You know, it's still to be told. I mean, these folks have been off of the job for about 2 weeks now, and so we will learn about what the unemployment needs are in the workforce. But a lot of those workers had been there since the beginning, so 28 years or plus, 25 years plus. Many of them are eligible for retirement. So over the coming months, we'll learn about what types of workers will need jobs and what type of demand there will be. We're also working closely with our folks here in Peoria, with Jennifer. About half of those workers come from around the Peoria area. So it's a joint effort to make sure that we care for those workers.
But there are still some people working at the plant.
Yeah, there's still about 250 workers there through the month of May that will be doing some parts making for their supply chain.
And what's the relationship in terms of how are you helping with those displaced workers?
So we have a site that we launched in partnership with CareerLink called StayGP. So it's stayGP.org. And that is to tackle not only the Mitsubishi folks, but also the folks that have been displaced by Caterpillar. So we identified a need to make it easy for people to identify new opportunities to stay in Greater Peoria. So at that site, there's 4 pathways individuals can take. The first is to find a new job opportunity. So we're working closely with our employers to promote specific job opportunities and also pulling in a job bank called Indeed, which kind of crawls through all the job banks that are out there in our region, and it takes all those opportunities and puts them in one place. So that's kind of the first piece, the first path. The second path on the site is about retraining. So Kyle kind of mentioned that there are often some short-term, especially opportunities to do some upskill training, or you may have a person who wants to take this opportunity to go into a new direction in their career. So the great thing at CareerLink, they have tuition reimbursement. So if you go through their process, a lot of times that training can cost little or nothing for that individual. So we wanted to make sure people knew that that opportunity existed and how to access that. The third path for us is about starting your own business. And we know that's a really important part of economic development, is encouraging people to launch their own companies. So the third pathway people can take is, I've got a great idea, I've always kind of thought about it. Now might be a good opportunity to kind of consider being my own boss. And so we have all kinds of tools and individuals that people can talk to help them consider whether they want to launch a company. That's also really important for the early retirees. And you know, at Caterpillar, we had 1,200 people take early retirement, and so we really want to make sure we capture those folks and their talent and keep them here if we can. And then finally, we have a path that's specifically just about early retirees. Kind of, I took early retirement, not really ready to sit at home on my couch yet. So what are other things I can do to get involved in the community, whether it's a part-time job, launching my own company, being a consultant, or just getting involved with opportunities here to volunteer. So
You mentioned Caterpillar. I want to talk about that in just a moment, but first I want to finish up with the Mitsubishi situation and the status of the plant. Mm-hmm. Where are we in terms of, because that's the other challenge for the task force.
Yeah, it's a significant property. There's 2.7 million square foot under roof. It's 700-acre property. So it's going to have to find a big user for that facility, and it's ongoing. We've had multiple entities come and look at the facility. That has been ongoing from the day of the announcement and will continue on into 16. But I also caution those that if somebody were to even say they were interested today or tomorrow, it would probably take at least a year to get that place back up to where they need it to start their production. So it'll be a long process, but we're very hopeful, and it's a great facility.
You're looking at automobile plant or automobile manufacturers currently?
It is made for automotive manufacturing, and so that will be our number one priority, is working with automotive makers here in the U.S., but also overseas. Once we feel like if we've exhausted those avenues, we'll look at all kinds of manufacturing, whether it's agricultural based or traditional type manufacturing.
Any incentives in the offing at this point in time?
Incentives are pretty premature at this point. We know that the state of Illinois, they've been very helpful and active in this process. They're willing to put some incentives on the table, but again, it has to be designed to the right deal and the right opportunity. And so until we know who the user would be, those incentives really aren't being discussed at this point.
Let's turn back to the Caterpillar situation. When we chatted last March, Caterpillar had just announced that it was going to build a new headquarters in downtown Peoria. It was going to be an 8, 9, 10-year process. And since that time, of course, the announcement of the layoffs worldwide, but many of those in central Illinois. How does that change your approach to trying to attract new business or have other businesses grow in light of the fact that the big manufacturing center is contracting in central Illinois?
You know, it really just underscores, I think, for us, or has, that the strategies that we're working on are critical to the region in terms of diversification, continued diversification of our suppliers and of our industries in the region. So our strategies overall have not changed and just have become even more critical in terms of what we're doing. But I will tell you, we talked a little bit about how important talent is. We think about traditional economic development has been all about we need to sell a building. We need to sell a piece of land. We need to attract somebody to come in and buy that. But the reality is now in economic development that companies, what they're looking for and what they need more than a building or land is talented people. And so having a group of talented people, which of course we have many, many talented people in our region, having available talented people can be a great opportunity for attraction.
You both were just to the Mid-America Economic Development Council conference up in Chicago, right? Yeah. And that's one of the messages you heard?
Absolutely. There was a recent study in Fortune magazine. The question was asked the top 500 CEOs in the country, what is the most pressing issue right now? And talent acquisition by far was the #1 issue. And so finding the right talent in an age where everything is technologically, cybersecurity, the mold has changed for economic developers. And so talking to our peers, and they're facing the same challenges. This isn't just a Central Illinois issue, this is a national issue. And so both of our communities have created targets for how do we create local talent. It's not just recruiting talent in, that's one piece of it. Probably the most important piece is how do we grow local talent. We have a STEM initiative that is launched in McLean County, a partnership with State Farm and Country, IBM, Microsoft, that are pooling funds to help guide the curriculum for our kids all the way from 4th grade through high school to make sure that they are excited and interested in those fields of STEM, but also connecting the dots between the schools and our universities so that we see a pipeline and businesses can interact with those kids along the way to build their excitement about what their future might look like. And so that is an ongoing thing, and that's something that's going to be around for a long time, is growing our own talent.
How complex is that effort to make sure that talent, starting in grade school, you're developing that? What tentacles are you putting out to make sure that there's a unified effort to develop those kinds of talents?
For us, an important first step was bringing all of the people that work on workforce initiatives together in one place and having a conversation and developing a strategy collectively so that we could better leverage the resources that we have to do that. Dr. Karat at District 150 has been a huge champion for this idea of pathways in our schools. We know that students do better, they stay in school, and they do better ultimately if we can make what they're learning in the classroom more relevant. And so we also know what the demand is right now in terms of the workforce, and we know what the future demand is going to look like. So developing pathways around health science, advanced manufacturing, information technology, that just makes sense for us. It gives the relevancy in terms of instruction to students, and it gets them interested in job opportunities that we know are in demand here in our region. So that work is going on right now here in Greater Peoria. We call it our Pathways program, although to the students, they're going to know it as Make Yourself, which will be the name of the campaign. It's going to be rolled out for us early next year. And it's the development of the pathways in the schools, starting with District 150. And it's also the involvement of the employers. As Kyle pointed out, it's very, very critical with those work-based learning opportunities, the opportunities for students starting in middle school with job shadow opportunities, and then in high school going on to internships with our employers. We know that if we can create the relevant pathways and we can put students in our employers' operations, we can really have a talented group of people at the end of that pipeline.
Kyle, how much of your effort is directed toward retention as opposed to trying to attract new business? And let's set Mitsubishi aside for a moment, because I know the task force is commanding time, but typically how much time do you spend on retaining jobs?
I'd say about 50%. People think of our industry as going out and recruiting business. That's obviously critical, but 70% of the jobs that will be created in the future will come from existing business. And so it's important for us to make sure that we understand what our business that we have already, what their needs are, what their workforce looks like, what their infrastructure needs are, how they can grow, how we can help incentivize them to grow. Having a constant dialogue with our local business is critical, because a lot of times they hit roadblocks in their own business pathway and sometimes don't know how to get around those. And so we try to have constant contact with our employee base, and we have a strong retention program that we've started this last year.
And it's tough to market to the community the success of retention. We kept 10 jobs in Peoria, or we added 5 jobs to a company that's already here. Nobody really hears that. They want to hear a replacement for the Mitsubishi plant, or the big, and that's not likely to happen on a regular basis.
We certainly see those projects happen, and we're all excited when we can introduce a new employer to the region. One of the things we learned, we had a speaker at our conference who shared that EA, which is a big video gaming company, and they talked about how they make decisions about their site location. And what they shared was what is really the new model in terms of attraction. They don't look for buildings or for land. What they look for is innovative startup companies, people who are talented, who have launched a company. Maybe the group has 5, 6, 7 people that are working there, and they've maybe developed an innovative game or an app that's out there. EA will come in and they'll buy that startup company, and that is how you are most likely to get an EA in your community there and growing. It's a very different model.
They don't come in and buy and move them out, do they?
They do not come in and buy and move them out, because their goal is to keep talent where talent wants to be, because they want to keep that talent, and it really does not matter to them where those people are located. So they'll come in and buy that company and grow it there. And because having talented people is more important to them than the infrastructure issues.
Difficult to tout the successes of job retention?
It's very difficult, and those are things that happen every day, and we see them when we talk to businesses that make decisions about how they're going to grow. But those are the things that economic development has to do. We have to care for our local businesses, and I think that's the number one priority, at least in our approach in McLean County, is to make sure that our local businesses know that we want them there, they're cared for, and we want to make sure that they're happy before we even think about recruiting a new business. So it goes hand in hand, but retention is critical.
When we were together last March, we were talking about the possibility that the state might not come up with a budget, and in fact they did not. What kind of an impact has that had on both of you in terms of being able to attract business to Bloomington Normal and to Peoria?
It is the number one challenge we face in Illinois as economic developers, is that we are in Illinois. The state has been in disarray, and this has been going on for decades. This has been something that's built up over 40, 50 years. And we're at a tipping point that if we don't change the way we do business in Illinois, and I think that a lot of the push and shove in Springfield right now is addressing those issues, and it's going to be a very important next 6 months or a year to see where those things come out, because we cannot continue to do business the way we've done it. Otherwise, we're going to start seeing a lot more lost opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with Kyle. Companies do not like uncertainty. They are very risk averse. They want to know what the rules are. They want to know how things sit, and we're in a state right now where there is no certainty, and so it's a very challenging time.
So what would the number one or top two issues be that the state could take care of that would help each of you in terms of retaining and or attracting jobs?
I think it goes to Jennifer's point about the certainty. We know we have a big problem with our pensions. We have unbalanced budgets, unpaid bills. If there was simply a plan in place to start remedying those problems, at least have a direction, whether it's going to take 30 years to solve those problems or 40 years, but at least knowing that we've set the course straight will allow some businesses to feel a little bit more comfortable about the direction of our state. When we go year in and year out with unbalanced budgets, a growing pension liability, and we continue to fail to address those big problems, that is when we're going to have challenges. But if we could just start to get to a place where we agree as a state to solve problems and at least set the course, that will allow business to be more comfortable.
And same question to you. What's the top issue in terms of what the state can do to help you?
Yeah, I would echo what Kyle said. We need to have a plan. We need to be committed to it. There needs to be certainty for businesses to feel comfortable making major investments in Illinois. Lots of things have been discussed: pension reform, workers' compensation reform. All of these play into business decisions about their long-term viability in any location, and they have many, many choices about where they're going to locate and where they're going to grow.
Tort reform amongst the issues?
Absolutely. Tort reform's an important piece. So it's a package deal. You can't just piecemeal one or two of these things. We have to have a package problem-solving thing for Illinois and address all of these issues that have been lingering for years and continue to add on. It seems like over the last year, Illinois, because of its location, its size of economy, its educational institutions, we're always in the top 5 for activity of companies looking to move here. And as we get to be a finalist, we usually drop off at the end because the state is that sort of determining factor. And so I see it, I know Jennifer sees it daily. If we could just get to a place where the state can say we have a plan and we're sticking to it, it would help us.
And with that, let's hope that the new year brings some solution to those kinds of issues. Thank you to Jennifer Daly of the Peoria EDC, and thank you to Kyle Ham of the Bloomington Normal EDC for your perspective on economic development. And thank you for joining us. This concludes another calendar year of At Issue. We'll be back next week with a new edition, starting off 2016, with a discussion about bipartisanship. We'll talk about the role that Everett Dirksen played in the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And please have a prosperous 2016.